Hello, everyone. Excellencies, colleagues, and friends, good morning, afternoon, or evening. It is a great pleasure to welcome you to the side event organized at the Commission on the Status of Women 66. We are virtually here together because while ICT's ability to save lives has been clearly demonstrated over the past decades, there remains this fundamental gender inequality in digital access that can have deadly consequences. So without further ado, I would like to invite His Excellency, Ambassador Mr. Mitch Field, the permanent representative of Australia to the United Nations, to deliver his opening remarks. Over to you, Ambassador.
Well, thank you so much, Ahita, and colleagues, it's terrific to be with you. And I've got to say, Australia is very pleased to be supporting this event today. It's always fabulous to partner with the ITU on the subject of equitable access to technology. It's something that I'm particularly passionate about, given my previous incarnation as Australia's Minister for Telecommunications. And the reason we're at this event is because every day we experience how technology is changing the way that we live. And we're here because women aren't where they should be. Women are underrepresented in the design, the development, and also the governance of tech. And even worse, women often lack basic access to technology. Women and girls, colleagues, must be fully connected and fully engaged to realise technological opportunity. This is particularly important in the context of environmental disaster risks and climate change. We all know that climate change and natural disasters affect everyone, but it's got to be said that women and girls often bear the heaviest burden. This is due to structural issues such as unequal access to credit, land ownership, and decision making. At the same time, our experience is that women and girls play pivotal roles in disaster contexts, helping to build resilience and also contributing as first responders. And far, far too often, they do so without connectivity and without access to the tech that can facilitate faster communications, which are just so important in times of trouble, but that also could facilitate much more efficient responses. And according to the ITU, when it comes to internet use, there is a global gender gap of 12.5%. And I just want to share with you one absolutely staggering statistic. In the developed world, 86% of women use the internet, but get a load of this, that's compared to only 15% in least developed countries. Let me just say that again. In developing countries, 86% of women use the internet compared to only 15% in least developed countries. That really is an astounding figure, which I think we should keep in our minds today as we're going through this discussion. And given the central role that ICTs play in responding to global challenges, including disasters and climate change, women's underrepresentation in design and in development really is troubling. Decision-making that excludes women really makes the assumption that climate change or the impact of environmental disasters is somehow gender neutral and that male leadership and participation represents the whole community. Of course, we know that's not the case. And what this does, well, it further serves to entrench inequality and discrimination and has a negative impact on our ability to respond to crises. So the message is this: to ensure the production of technologies that meet the needs of our society as a whole, you've got to have meaningful participation, you've got to have meaningful leadership, and you've got to have meaningful representation of women throughout the design and the development of technology. That's our message today. And the simple fact is that governments and societies will be better equipped to respond to a changing climate when they draw on all of the available talent. And for our part, the Australian government is committed to doing what we can to address this. Now, I'm very pleased to share with you that gender equality flows through our foreign policy and our development agendas. And this includes our international cyber and critical technology engagement strategy, and also our National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security. A very key area of focus for us is women's leadership in our region, in the Indo-Pacific. And let me just give you a couple of examples. One is a really great program called Pacific Women Lead, to which we'll put $170 million over 5 years. It aims to empower Pacific women and Pacific organisations to respond to the needs of women and girls, including responses to COVID and climate change. It will focus on women's leadership, women's rights, women's health, including sexual and reproductive health, women's safety, women's economic empowerment, as well as regional gender equality efforts. Another really cool program in the Pacific is Women's Resilience to Disasters. And this is a new $13.5 million partnership to empower women in Fiji, Kiribati and Vanuatu to lead Pacific solutions to disaster prevention, preparedness and recovery. And the goal of this program is to make the lives and the livelihoods of women and girls resilient to disasters and hazards. Australia is also pleased to support the Women's International Network on Disaster Risk Reduction in partnership with UNDRR. This is a professional network to support women working in DRR to enhance their role in decision making and to empower them to attain leadership. We're also proud to promote greater diversity and inclusiveness in the design, development and use of cyberspace and critical technology through our cyber and critical tech cooperation program. And through this, we're helping to educate and to train women in Vietnam, Thailand, Philippines and Cambodia in network engineering and management. And we also support greater participation by women in discussions at the UN through what is an absolutely fabulous program, which is the Women in International Security and Cyberspace Fellowship Project. And this fellowship supports attendance at the UN open-ended working group sessions, but it also provides negotiation and international law training to mid-career female diplomats from Fiji, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Papua New Guinea, Philippines, Samoa, Thailand, Timor-Leste, Vanuatu and Vietnam. And finally, colleagues, I am delighted to share details of a brand new initiative launched by Australia in partnership with the ITU, and a shout out to Doreen, good to see you. This was launched on International Women's Day last week, and it's a training program for women delegates to the ITU plenipotentiary. And this is designed to bolster women delegates' negotiation and advocacy skills and subject matter expertise. Can I say, we invite you to join us in this effort by nominating delegates to attend the training course. And we hope the first gender responsive plenipotentiary in Bucharest this September will see a growing cohort of women delegates taking the floor and taking the lead. So friends, for our part, we're trying to be remorselessly practical in our focus to make a difference. All of us are in heated agreement that we need to connect underserved communities, that we need to ensure that women are empowered to contribute to and to benefit from a digital world has got to be our shared priority. We all know that we must do that. So with those few words, can I thank everyone for being with us today, and we look forward to collectively moving the ball forward. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your very engaging and inspiring opening remarks that have really underscored the importance of the theme of the event here today. Before we proceed, I would like to briefly introduce myself. I'm Agatha Gangavarapu. I'm a member of the Generation Connect Visionaries Board at ITU. I'm currently in academia, working in the domain of cybersecurity for Internet of Things and smart sustainable cities. I've been involved in various youth capacity building initiatives, including my work as a founding member of the United Nations Internet Governance Forum, recognized Youth Internet Governance Forum India, where we focus on youth empowerment and engagement in the areas of internet governance policies and technological developments, which cover the pillars of data, trust, inclusion, and environment. I'm very honored to be moderating the conversation today with some of the leading stakeholders working at the nexus of ICTs and gender equality. Today's discussion will focus on keeping gender equality at the center of ICT solutions to environment, disaster risk, and climate change. And what does it mean at the international community in terms of strategy, tools, and innovative solutions? Emergency telecommunications response experiences in the past have demonstrated that the receipt, understanding, and ability to act on information during disasters is directly related to access to voice and data connectivity. Globally, women are 12.5% less likely to use the internet, and this digital gender divide reaches up to 33% in least developed countries, preventing women from receiving timely, life-saving information. The Equals Global Partnership to close the gender digital divide, and in particular, the Equal Access Coalition works to ensure that women and girls have full access to digital technologies, devices, and services. The partner organization and guests represented here today will discuss how this is crucially important for disaster risk reduction policies, programs, and responses. This session will also propose concrete actions that a range of stakeholders can undertake and are undertaking to promote women's empowerment and preparing for and responding to environment disasters. It is my honor to introduce the panelists who have joined us here today. We have Ms. Doreen Bogdan-Martin, who's the Director, Telecommunication Development Bureau at ITU. We have Ms. Aarti Bhola Maini, Secretary General, Global Satellite Operators Association, GSOA. We have Mr. John Wüste, who's the Chief Regulatory Officer at GSMA, the Global System for Mobile Communications Association. We have Ms. Saluvaya Kawaka, the President, Tonga Women in ICT, Chief System Analyst, Prime Minister's Office, Tonga. Thank you everyone for your time and for being with us here today. If anyone at any point during the following discussion has any questions or comments, please leave them in the chat. The Equals team will be gathering the questions for a 10-minute question and answer session near the end of the event. Right. So when a disaster strikes or an accident or an emergency situation, we observe that the first response of the individual or the community affected is usually to call their near and dear ones and those who can help. So I would like to ask this question to John as to what is the importance of connectivity in reducing the risk of environment disasters, as well as better prepping for and responding to environment disasters, particularly for women. John, over to you.
Thank you so much for the question, and very timely. And of course, let me also thank the co-organizers for today's session, and also for the flexibility you've shown me in terms of the order. I'm speaking before some far more impressive speakers. Thank you for that. But of course, climate change, as we know, is going to impact all of us. But it is likely, and it's probable, that it will have a disproportionate impact on women. We know that women represent a disproportionate part of the world's poor, and women are awfully highly dependent on local natural resources for their livelihood and for providing for their families. So, in low middle income countries, women are often responsible for food gathering, as we know, collecting water, firewood, heating, cooking. So droughts and floods, heat waves exacerbated by climate change make these things more time consuming and make them more difficult, sometimes impossible. And they could leave a woman with less time to pursue other income generation or to pursue education. So I think if we want to really focus on mitigating the impact of climate change, we do need to focus on women. We need to focus on the empowerment of women with education, information, and tools for making environmentally friendly decisions where they can. And I think that's why mobile is so key in these discussions, because we want to improve the resilience of women to climate change In most of the world, it is the primary, in some cases, the only way that people connect to information and the internet. So for those women, really connectivity is key. And I think when we look specifically at the agricultural example I mentioned, millions of women depend on agriculture for their livelihood, also, of course, for food security for their families. And we know this will be highly affected by climate change. So mobile can provide a key way in providing women farmers with crucial information and advice on issues such as changing temperatures, rainfall patterns, desertification, and of course, pest control. And I think financial inclusion will also be a key factor to resilience here, in that mobile money has the potential to increase women's financial resilience to economic shocks, especially during climate crises. And increasingly, I think this is also an important channel for vital humanitarian aid, which is becoming increasingly necessary. So mobile can really help empower women, making them more connected, making them safer, supporting livelihoods, and providing access to resources and services. But we do know there is a significant mobile gender gap. The fact is that women are significantly less likely than men to own a mobile phone and to use mobile internet or mobile money services. In fact, the most recent data at GSMA shows that progress in addressing the mobile internet gender gap is stalling, and in some cases going backwards. So women in low and middle income countries are now 16% less likely to own or use a mobile internet than a man. So if mobile gender gap is not addressed, women risk missing out on the opportunities that mobile digital connectivity is bringing the men in society. And this, of course, is exacerbated by the impacts of climate change. So to really try to tackle this very challenging issue, because if we look globally at the usage gap, I mean, we now finally have more than half the world's population connected to mobile internet, but that means almost half is not. So how do we tackle this, and how do we address the barriers, particularly for women's internet use and adoption? The issues are lack of literacy, digital skills, lack of awareness, of course, the problem of affordability, particularly of handsets, as well as in some places concerns about safety and security. So at the GSMA, we've been very fortunate. We have the support from the UK Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office and Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency that enables us to collect data on the mobile gender gap and barriers faced by women in low and middle income countries. Because I really think we can't tackle the issues we're talking about today without the right data. We do have a lot of work to do, and we at GSMA and across many parts of the mobile industry are very much committed to Equals and the Equals Global Partnership for Gender Equality in the digital age. I would encourage you, I will look forward to hearing from the other speakers today, but I just want to flag as we start to, this discussion is going to take a long time. Going forward, I want to encourage everyone to keep an eye out for our upcoming Mobile Gender Gap Report 2022. We're going to launch that in June. So this will give us the latest data. So the latest thing for us to look at and how to respond on mobile ownership, mobile internet use, and we'll include some recommendations and best practice. So anyway, that's just my perspective from the mobile industry, but I'm really pleased to see perspectives from other sectors here as well.
Thank you, John, for your response. And connectivity is indeed critical. So in an order of priority, telecommunication emergency support functions, number one. So Aarti, what are the challenges of maintaining telecommunications in remote climate vulnerable island communities at times of disaster, and how relevant is this question with regards to gender?
Thank you, Ihita. It's great to be here. I'm very grateful to have been invited. The question of connecting island communities is definitely a really important one. The Caribbean islands, for example, are amongst the 25 most vulnerable nations in terms of disasters per capita. And we've also seen the Pacific Islands be repeatedly battered by earthquakes and other disasters. So it's no surprise that the IMF and the World Bank have been calling for investment in ex-ante resilience, including connectivity. Island states are also really heavily dependent on weather-sensitive sectors like tourism and agriculture. So when it comes to connecting them, the question really is first and foremost about resilience. And that's where satellite comes in. It's very easy to assume that satellites can offer islands disaster response, aviation, maritime, and that's it. But in fact, it's about a lot more than that. And there are some great success stories about satellite connectivity transforming islands. In Jamaica, it's taken Viasat, one of our members, 48 days to connect 100 isolated schools. In Indonesia, you have one of the country's largest banks, Bank Rakyat, which owns its own satellites to connect 11,000 branches across the Indonesian archipelago. In Vanuatu, as you've heard, satellites repeatedly ensure continuity of service for citizens, businesses, and governments, given the country's vulnerability to disasters. And in Puerto Rico, ISPs learned their lesson after Hurricane Maria back in 2017. At the time, they used satellite broadband to connect businesses, and now they keep a supply of satellite broadband systems on the island to get businesses up and running within hours of a disaster, because they know that once terrestrial infrastructure has been destroyed, it takes time to build it back. So people think satellite systems are just gap fillers, but very often they become the mainstay lifeline because they work, because they're robust, and because the business case for fiber and mobile in low population density areas is hard to close, and particularly so on islands. If I turn to the role of women in this context, I wanted to share an image. Could you share this slide that I have sent? Thank you. So here you can see an image of a woman carrying materials with which to repair her home after Cyclone Idai in Mozambique. And I wanted to share this image because for me, this really speaks volumes. It really drives home the point about women being natural nurturers who can make a massive difference if they're given the tools to do so. And some of our members are leveraging satellite connectivity to do precisely this. You can stop sharing the slide. Thank you. Avanti, one of our members, continues to educate marginalized girls across 245 rural schools in Kenya using satellite, so that girls who have access to online maths tuition for just 1 hour per week are actually seeing their maths age improve by 18 months in 1 year. The impact is, of course, much more than just on maths. It's about building confidence. It's about elevating their social status, and ultimately about giving them the chance to become financially independent so that one day they can break the cycle of poverty that may have dogged their families and their communities for decades. Another example is from Inmarsat, another one of our members, who has worked with a local Nigerian healthcare company to bring video-based training to rural nurses. This has enabled those nurses to support communities, nursing mothers, but also to be ready with inbuilt local capacity in case disaster strikes. So education, to our mind, is truly about breaking down barriers around gender roles that have existing for a long, long time. I'm really proud that satellite operators are playing a role in that. I'm going to leave it there for the moment, Ihita. Thank you.
Thank you, Arti, for emphasizing the telecommunication difficulties in remote climate vulnerable areas, but also providing solutions forward. So there are other challenges such as the digital divide that affect how communities use and leverage telecommunication facilities. What does digital inclusion mean in the context of disaster and emergency response? So Doreen, this question's towards you. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, super. Thank you. It's great to be here with everyone. Thank you, Ambassador, for your opening remarks. It's really wonderful to see your commitment and the commitment of Australia. And of course, as you mentioned, on the ITU front, we're very excited about that MOU that was just signed, and about having a gender responsive plenipotentiary conference coming up in Bucharest later this year. To come to the question, I thought I could perhaps borrow from the GA president at the opening of the Commission on the Status of Women this week on Monday, when he said, despite being disproportionately affected, my computer wanted to do an update there, sorry. Despite being disproportionately affected by climate change, women play a crucial role in adaptation and mitigation, and have, of course, the knowledge and understanding of what's needed to adapt to changing environment and come up with practical solutions. I think that's a great statement that he made at the opening of CSW. I think that we all understand that digital technologies are crucial to disaster preparedness, to response, and of course to recovery. For the victims of disaster, they can serve quite literally as a lifeline of course, by providing things like instant messaging services with geolocation functionality, free calls to emergency hotlines, or early warning alerts of impending disasters, hazards. But of course, as we've heard from John, from Arti, and of course from the ambassador, because of this persistent and widespread gender digital divide, the fact is that women and girls are significantly less likely to have access to these services. Our latest figures, and John stressed the importance of data. Data is key. Our latest figures that we released in December show that globally, 57% of women are using the internet compared to 63% of men. Maybe those numbers don't sound so big, but let's, of course, remember it's a global average. So in reality, the world's least developed countries, and of course, I say this today on the eve of the LDC-5 outcome that will come out tomorrow, part 1, fewer than 1 in 5 women has any kind of digital access. I think sadly, all too often, it's the poorest countries that are hit hardest by disasters like extreme weather events. We are pleased to be a strong partner in the Emergency Telecommunications Cluster. We recently did a joint report with the ETC. In that report, we showed that women are disproportionately at higher risk than men during emergencies. And of course, the report confirms that women's ability to harness the power of digital to mitigate the impact of disaster is actually impeded by a number of factors. Not having devices, as John mentioned, not being able to afford the internet connection, of course, is another big issue. Sociocultural factors that can hinder their access, not having content available in relevant languages, not having those digital literacy skills that are so fundamental. I think the sort of blunt reality is that when women do not have equal access to warnings and to timely information, they're more vulnerable to both the short-term and the long-term effects of disasters. I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Doreen. Thank you very much for your proactive work in bridging the gender digital divide. With looking at another dimension for enabling women to contribute, John, this question is for you. How does women's financial independence relate to their responsiveness to disasters?
Thank you for that. And I mean, I think it touches on what so many people have already said, which is that that in low, middle, and least developed countries, they are going to be the ones most hardly hit by the climate crisis. I mean, a key element, of course, in response is not just the immediate response, but having the financial resilience at the household level to be able to weather that situation. And more often than not, that depends on women in the household. It's no surprise that financial services, whether they be savings, credit, or insurance, can provide a buffer to the impact of a disaster for any of us, but in particular in these extreme cases, that would allow these households to recover and rebuild without cutting out some of the basic necessities like food or education. So for women in low and middle income countries, I mean, mobile money can be a very powerful tool, mobile financial services generally. We currently have 1.2 billion registered mobile money accounts. Not all of those are active. We can see by those who are actively using them that these financial services do have a positive impact on productivity and incomes for women, especially for those, for example, in agriculture. So mobile technology and also mobile money specifically is also, as we're talking about, weather crisis, is also increasingly the tool of choice for providing humanitarian or disaster support services, such as cash distribution schemes. So really critical that we have these tools. That we have the partnerships in place with the relevant humanitarian agencies, with the relevant governments, and of course, with the people on the ground. So it really does take everyone working together to tackle this. But at this point, women are still 33% less likely than a man to have a mobile money account. And across sub-Saharan Africa, which is the global leader in mobile money adoption, 58% of women are excluded financially. So they do not have access to formal financial services. The financial exclusion of women is due to a large number of reasons. Many of them are the same as digital exclusion: a lack of awareness, not having access to handset, low literacy, and not having the skills to use it. Also, I think as the director mentioned, social norms in some countries can also restrict women's financial independence, especially in those places where men tend to dominate in the decision-making process on household finances. So mobile operators and other mobile money companies, because it is not just mobile operators, see this gender gap as a lost opportunity. I mean, these are people that could be connected, could be part of our services. To try to move this forward, we actually created a joint initiative supported by UK FCDO and Swedish SIDA with 40 mobile network operators across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And in each case, these operators have made very formal and specific commitments to reduce the gender gap in either mobile money and or mobile internet customer services. And we have already concretely increased the number of women with access over the past few years by 55 million. So a lot, but still far from enough. And to me, I guess a key takeaway from that is that it really is going to take very concerted and targeted action so that we can make progress on solving this gap. This includes, in the case of mobile money, recruiting more female agents and merchants, developing savings and loan products tailored to meet women's needs, and helping women's agricultural groups to see the benefits of mobile money in terms of payments. And I think the more specific that operators can be and the more concrete, and I'm sure this is the case in other industries, and I'm sure the same RTO, I'm sure, can give specific examples of what the satellite community is doing as well. In Ghana, MTN has made a very specific commitment to increase the proportion of female customers of its merchant payment service, which is called Momo Pay, if I remember correctly, to 40% of their base by 2023. So I think it's only through very clear targets, clear measuring, and clear actions that we can make progress. And I think it's very important that we don't forget, and is really pleased that we're here with government representatives as well, because we need to remember the important role that government policy and the public sector play in driving demand for greater financial inclusion and helping facilitate development of networks. As a closing comment, I would just, we have recently published a paper called Mobile Money and Consumer Financial, I can't remember the name of the types of services, something to that effect. But anyway, it provides some specific thoughts on how we can build greater financial resilience alongside this acceleration of climate disaster. So we're trying to pull together as much data as we can so then we can talk very concretely with other parts of industry, parts of the international organization community, and of course, specifically with affected governments. So I'll leave it there, but thank you for that question.
Thank you very much, John, for your inputs. I have a question for Selu. So there are great learnings from actual experiences of mitigation activities and how ICTs have actually helped. So Selu, please to share with us on what has been the role of ICTs during the recent difficulties in Tonga.
Good morning from this end of the world. It's very good to be part of this panel right now, and sorry for jumping in late. With the recent difficulty that happened here in Tonga, a natural impact that we couldn't control, the volcanic eruption and tsunami, Tonga broke its international and domestic fiber cable. While people were trying to run inward and away to higher grounds, all communication broke down for Tonga. And this is when everyone in Tonga realized the importance of communications and ICT. Major roles ICT played on the very next morning of the incident. Both female and male engineers of all ISPs and cable limiteds here in Tonga tried desperately to restore some form of communications for the island. Well, there was no internet, no phone services. So we were back to trying to get some satellite restorations. A lot of technical work happened at the back end. And after a few days, we finally established a phone service where people can finally SMS or call their families to check on them. And that was only service on the main island. We couldn't even reach out to the outer islands, and we couldn't reach out to outside of Tonga. And with a small satellite bandwidth that was available, there was difficult decisions to make for what to prioritize, where the bandwidth to go, to at least establish some form of communications, especially during this difficult time for the need for support, especially from overseas. So yeah, it was very, very difficult. And during this outage, we had support services, satellite services from, let me see, there was ITU, Spark New Zealand. There was quite a few. I can't get it on top of my head, but then I can add it on later on as we discuss. And yeah, that's what I can share for now.
Thank you, Sendu, for sharing your personal experiences and welcome. The world is replete with disparities and disadvantaged sections of societies, and there is always a need for positive interventions. So Arti, to what extent can coalitions such as the Equals Access Coalition address challenges in gender equality in the context of humanitarian risks, disaster risks, and climate change?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I would actually like to start my response with a shout out to BDT Director Doreen. Doreen, you have made a huge effort to bring home the importance of gender inclusion, and I think that your continued push on this topic is helping women more than you may realize. Being interviewed for the ITU and UN's Talking Tech series was an eye-opener for me personally. I had no idea that something so small as an interview about my journey would actually give confidence and courage to other young ladies to push forward with what they want to achieve. And it could be the difference between getting married or pursuing a vibrant career that ultimately gives them financial independence and choices. And it's so important. So thank you. And Equals is another initiative that we need to drive forward in the service of gender equality when it comes to humanitarian disaster and climate change. Because as you have said, as many have said, we know that disasters disproportionately impact women locally and globally. Equals already provides a platform to collaborate with partners that we may not otherwise know. I know that's the case for GSOA. And my hope for the future is twofold. First, that the coalition can continue to showcase best practices around ICTs, bringing gender equality in front of governments on all continents to scale up and replicate some of the great work that lies within its membership. And secondly, that it can really help move the needle on promoting women, for example, in high-tech sectors and in leadership positions. I actually agree with Christine Lagarde, who spoke recently at HEC, a Grande École in France, when she said that mindsets are going to take way too long to change, and quotas are required to make that happen. So maybe that is something for Equals, and Doreen, something for you to maybe encourage the community to be bolder in calling for. The picture that I showed earlier of the lady in Mozambique, for me, it says it all. Whether it's during a disaster or in normal times, whatever that might be, women are assumed and taken for granted as the carers, but they do not receive the appreciation of the responsibility that that entails in terms of ensuring the health, the well-being, the safety, and the potential of future generations to contribute to society. And so for me, the work of the Access Coalition can consciously go beyond bridging digital divides through ICTs to also changing perceptions so that the social status of women changes and their overall life quality is enhanced as a result. That would be my contribution on that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Arti, for sharing these extremely important points. Now, I would like to take this line of thought around the need for positive interventions for different sections like we were talking about further ahead. So Doreen, the question is to you. How can young people, especially young women, actively contribute to disaster risk programs and policies?
Thank you for the question. And I dropped off for a second there. My computer really is anxious to reboot, so apologies for that. And thank you, Arti, for that shout out, and kudos to you for that Talking Tech interview, which indeed did inspire many women and girls. So thank you for that. So focusing on young people, especially young women, I think is critical. Again, I'm going to borrow from something the UNSG said this week at CSW, which was about having a sustainable future, that we need to have women and girls front and center leading the way. We need young people's perspectives, including those of young women, as I mentioned, for lots of reasons. Of course, those perspectives need to be part of the conversation, I would say, right from that initial design of a disaster risk program or disaster policies. I think diversity in disaster response teams is equally and vitally important, so that we can be sure that the strategies that we're designing actually meet everyone's needs. I think that's critical. Of course, women have perhaps different needs that are very relevant to how a community can deal with a crisis situation. Women are often caring for family members, older family members, perhaps younger family members. In many cases, they can be less educated. They can lack those digital skills that we spoke about. And they may lack that access that we've already covered to digital technologies. I would say this is why our emergency telecommunications team is very proactive in trying to help countries put in place those national emergency telecommunications plans. We're trying to ensure that women, including young women, have a seat at the table and that they have a clear role in decision making as well as in community planning. I think that's fundamental. We know that ICTs are critical in disaster preparedness, in response and management. And that's why we need to have women be central, be at the core in this process, really from the very outset. As I said, when we're designing these policies for preparedness, when we're responding, when we're recovering from disasters, so that these solutions can be designed in a way that actually meets their needs. I think some examples, of course, would be the development of multi-hazard early warning systems, delivering alerting messages to communities that would be at risk. Also at the same time, harnessing both the energy and the skills of youth. I think that should never, ever be overlooked, because young people can contribute so much in designing effective ICT-enabled disaster response interventions. So young people have to be at the core. That's why, of course, we came up with our Generation Connect initiative. That's why we have our youth strategy. And of course, we're thrilled to have you as one of our key members and to be leading us in our discussion today. We're very proud of that. Our Generation Connect work brings young people into our discussions, not just as participants, but really as policy leaders to help us ensure that the strategies and policies that we're discussing are actually meeting the needs and contributing to the empowerment and growth of young people. So perhaps I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Doreen, for emphasizing the role of young people. I'm on the Generation Connect Regional Youth Board, and we work towards empowering youth and encouraging their involvement in digital developments on an equal footing. You know, young people, as myself, we bring in a unique set of experiences and perspectives, and there are financial barriers, cultural hindrances, we have lack of sufficient skills and opportunities that impact a sustainable youth contribution. But even within the Indian context, from my experience, working with grassroots youth organizations and initiatives, gender and inclusion is another major challenge. So addressing these issues at the stage of the youth is definitely an important agent for change management. So yes, so now Selu, this question for you. What is the importance of women's perspective in ICTs while planning for emergencies? And what can we learn from the experiences of women in your context, and what does this teach us about the future?
Thank you. Major ICT decisions include inclusion, community, technology, resources to better plan and develop strategies. In Tonga, women are expected to be responsible for things like look after the family, cook, and many more other home responsibilities. And the pressure is a lot on their shoulder, but it's important to have women's input into planning. With this responsibility, they can, with the responsibility of women to quickly adapt and look after their responsibilities for their family, they can easily and quickly be proactive during planning on emergency cases. Their mental preparedness to respond to their family needs and the availability to work around obstacles are useful during such events. And at times when we face setbacks or diversions, they are able to think literally around the big picture. Women have the capability to include strong planning advisors in a table for decision making here in Tonga due to culture and respect that also supports and helps. And after this incident that happened and for the future, it is agreed that that both bottom up and community level engagement are essential. And yeah, this will be my contribution for now.
Thank you very much, Sulu, for your efforts. Now we have one final question for everyone here today. What actions in your organization or is your organization taking to make sure that women stay at the center of the policies and programs in order to address environment disaster risks? And if you could go around, I would like to go around the virtual table, and then if you could all give quick responses, that'd be wonderful. So maybe we could start with Aarti.
Sure, thank you. So we are making sure that we raise awareness on the important role that women play at times of disaster, and in particular, their instinctive ability to embrace the benefits of connectivity to serve preparedness and response when confronted with crisis situations. We are really pushing the importance of education of young women for sustainable growth and how connectivity for marginalized communities is a game changer. And then within GSOA itself, Natalia, my colleague, and I, we are trying to promote our women colleagues and to show by example how much is to be gained when women support other women and when women actually go beyond competing with each other, which is so easy to do when you work in the hard commercial world, So thank you.
Thank you, Aarti. John?
Sure, thank you so much. I think within GSMA, obviously we represent the mobile operators globally. So that's 750 operators in every corner of the globe. So our real goal here is to make sure that they understand what the gaps are and have the data, and also understand that it won't just happen on its own. We need to be targeted, we need to be concerted in our efforts, and we make very specific commitments with certain partner operators on how we can achieve it. So then we can demonstrate that when you do this and you work as a company and you work in harmonization with the government, you can actually bridge the gap. And specifically with regard to women, but of course, there are other digital gaps as well that need to be addressed. But I think really critically, if we get women more connected, both to financial services and digital services, I think the countries will be profoundly in a better position.
Thank you, John. Doreen, could we have your inputs too?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. So I'm going to perhaps focus on, of course, equals. So we have our Equals Global Partnership. We've heard already from John and Arti about this, where we're focusing on closing the access gap, closing the skills gap, and of course, bringing more women into the technology space. I think that's a critical contribution that the ITU makes. The other piece is our network of women. We've just created this network of women, which is super exciting for our World Telecommunications Development Conference that kicks off on the 6th of June in Kigali. So we're trying to get more women to participate in that conference, not just as a delegate, but as an active player, a leader, and a contributor into those discussions at that development conference. The other piece I wanted to mention, and we haven't touched on this, of course, when we talk about disasters and disaster management and response, there are also cyber disasters. So we have our Women in Cyber program, which I find also very exciting. It's a mentorship program. We're working with Africa, the Arab states, and we've just included a new cohort from the Asia Pacific. I think that's also a critical piece to ensure that we bring more women and girls into the cybersecurity space. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doreen. Selu, over to you.
I'll be talking on Tomoe Women ICT. And this organization allows women, girls, to enter the ICT industry without fear of discrimination and to give them equal opportunity in this industry. We also play roles for trying to get women and girls be present and accounted for in decision-making in the ICT sector here in Tonga, try and support to reduce barriers with their career growth for women. In the sector, we also try to promote inclusive training for them and establish connections with learning institutes to further give them opportunities. And importantly, we promote awareness for Tomoe Women in ICT for those who are interested in this career path. And yes, as Doreen has mentioned, we also conduct awareness of cybersecurity here in Tonga. So yeah, that's it from my end.
Thank you very much, Selu. So I thank all the panelists for sharing the actions that your organization is taking, around making sure that women stay at the center of policies and programs around the theme of environment disaster risk. So this takes us to the end of the formal panel portion of the side event. We now have some time for the audience questions, and I see that there are some already in the chat as well. So if anyone has any more, please do write them, and the Equals team can ask them to the panelists today. I would request the Equals team to take over now.
Thank you so much, Ihida. I have a first question from the chat. And this is specifically it was a general question, but I think if we can start maybe with Doreen, if you have an answer, and if anybody else would like to jump in, that would be wonderful. So the question is, on average, is there sufficient adequate support to build out mobile infrastructure globally, or are there places where the infrastructure is not in place, so we need to think outside of the box? Thank you.
I think we lost Doreen. Oh, there she is.
Okay, I have just had, all right, I've just switched devices. Can you hear me now? Okay, sorry about that. My computer had to restart, which it did, and good thing I had 2 laptops. So thank you for that question, and I think that we should get some inputs from John and Arti as well. We like to think positively that we have succeeded in covering the planet with 3G and in many cases 4G mobile coverage. But the reality is that 2.9 billion people don't have any access to the internet, and hundreds of millions more are not sufficiently connected in a way that's actually meaningful to change their lives. Does more work need to be done on the infrastructure side? Yes, we still need to get to, in many cases, those last mile communities. We need to make sure that the infrastructure is resilient, but perhaps we need to do more in bringing down the cost of services of devices and actually stimulating the case for usage and the demand for services. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe I'll jump in on this as well, because I think it is an excellent question. I mean, we know that around 51% of the world's population has a subscription to something we would consider mobile internet. And I think about 6% has access to no mobile infrastructure. So it is the 40 some odd percent, 3-something billion people who actually could access mobile internet or mobile financial services if they either could afford the handsets, could afford the service, could use the service, found value in the service. So to me, I think it is important that we continue to look at how we serve, because I mean, you know, when we look at 6% of the population, that is around 700 million people. So that's a lot of people that need coverage. And of course, I think, RT has looked at a lot of very creative ways of partnering and delivering services to the unserved areas. But I think we have a huge opportunity, especially if we can work if industry can work together, governments can work together to try to target improving digital skills and literacy. We've seen Minister Paula in Rwanda have a very effective deployment of digital skills training and increase usage. So I think it is this, I personally, I think from the GSMA, from the mobile industry perspective, we have seen a huge drop and a huge expansion in infrastructure deployment. There are some areas where it will simply be not commercially sustainable to do that. And there we need governments and other services to help provide it. But to me, what's the big scandal for all of us really is there's so many people who could have access, but for one reason or another don't. And I think it's a huge opportunity for us to bridge that, but it's a big number. So that's really, I think, our big focus at GSMA, bridging the usage gap.
So I think you wanted me to come in as well on this one. Otherwise, there's a specific question about satellite. What would you like me to take?
You can take whichever one you prefer.
Okay. I mean, I agree with what has been said. I think there needs to be a little bit of thinking out of the box and not making an assumption that there is a minimum requirement defined by speeds or latency that people need. We will find when we look at all the disasters that go on in the world that there is a plenitude of different technologies, and they are all serving a very, very valuable purpose. So there's there should be no red line there. There's a specific question about Tonga. And whether satellite could have helped. Satellite did respond in Tonga. Initially, nothing could land because the airport runway could not be used because of ash deposits. But operators and service providers were standing by. So equipment was ready on planes in New Zealand, waiting for clearance to fly. And as soon as that clearance came in, we saw connectivity within a few hours, in fact. Speedcast was providing trunking services to the Tonga Communication Corporation, and they turned up 100 megabit per service on almost immediately. You had 9 networks of Australia looking to fly in a satellite network satellite news gathering service, which they did, and there was different GSOA members were weighing in with VSATs and different forms of broadband connectivity. So that did all happen. It took some time. There was also a concern because Tonga was COVID-free, so they were a little worried about bringing in people and equipment, which increased the risk of COVID. But in the end, it worked out. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think we are running out of time for a question and answer period at this point. But if you would like to have a quick response to that and maybe answer the question directly as well, if you'd like to, then you're welcome to close our question and answer session. Thank you very much for everyone's responses and questions.
Thank you. I think already hit it spot on. That's exactly what happened. We couldn't, if satellite was already available on island at the time, we could have falled back quickly to it. But unfortunately, we had to wait on some equipment that couldn't get into Tonga ASAP due to the airport not being available. And yes, after all this activity, we finally have COVID in Tonga, but restorations of the internet is now back online, and the satellite did help for a whole month before we actually had the fiber back online. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone here today, for sharing your thoughts and your experiences, and thank you for your questions. We have two final speakers, so for the side event. First, I'm honored to introduce Ms. Anita Bhatia, who's a Deputy Executive Director at UN Women. Ma'am, over to you.
Thank you very much. And can I just say it's a great pleasure to be with all of you here and to see some old friends on this distinguished panel. So let me just start by thanking the Government of Australia and others who have organized this event, Ambassador Fifield, esteemed panelists, ladies and gentlemen. It's really good to be with you here to close this event. This is a really relevant conversation, and it's relevant because the world is still, as we just heard, battling COVID-19, but it is also battling a number of humanitarian crises across the world, in the Sahel, in Yemen and Afghanistan, and now most recently and tragically in Ukraine. And all of these affect women and girls much more than they affect men, though of course men are at the front line fighting the battle in Ukraine. So as we reflect on this topic, I think we have to connect it to something very real. And this is not an abstract conversation about whether or not gender equality matters and why it should matter. This is a real conversation about the very real human impact of not having connectivity. So the first thing I would say is that we need to think differently about connectivity, and we need to get to a point where universal access to the web is considered a public service, much like primary education or healthcare. Today, there is no question that governments must provide and must invest in infrastructure for primary education. Nobody questions that. Nobody questions, though of course there are huge variations in the degree to which there is government provision of healthcare, but the fact that the state has a role to play in providing healthcare is not really questioned. The degree is, but the role is recognized. We are not yet at that point when it comes to universal access to the web. And we need to get to that point. So there is still a need for huge advocacy around this and political will to consider access to the web a public service and a public good that requires investment by the state. Because if there was any doubt of the vital connection between development outcomes and connectivity, we saw very clearly during the pandemic that if one did not have connectivity, then one was seriously disadvantaged. And we see this in the case most tellingly. There are many examples, but one really striking example is the fact that today you have 11 million girls out of school. Now, many of these girls will never go back to school. Many will be married off, and many, for economic reasons, will not return to education, which means there will be structural inequities baked into the system And the effects of this are not visible today. They're going to show up in a generation. So, we know that if these young girls had access, had connectivity, they would remain in the system. So basically, being offline is going to mean being off life for lots of women and girls. So I really want to underscore the importance of connectivity. Now, linking this to environmental disaster risks and climate change, there are huge opportunities from connectivity for understanding and anticipating disaster risk. But if you are part of the 50 billion that, the 50% that John mentioned who are not connected, or the 6% who have no access at all, most of whom will be women, then how can you have any advance notification of disasters, of weather-related risks, and how can you prepare? This is why it's not surprising that when you look at how many people, of what percentage of the population that died in the Solomon Islands, in 2014, 90% of that was women. And that is not a representation of the distribution of women in the overall population. That is just a reflection of the fact that women are always disproportionately affected by disasters, and all kinds of disasters, but all particularly environmental disasters. So on the opportunity side, we see that if there was connectivity, one could think of women farmers, for instance, having access to information about inputs, about weather conditions, about weather risks, and managing those risks so that they are able to produce more sustainably and in a way that is climate smart. So in order to have climate smart agriculture that can help to mitigate the impact of climate change, in order to have early warning systems that can help to prevent the impact of an upcoming disaster, connectivity is essential. And so again, just to conclude, I would remind us again that this is not an abstract conversation. This has real consequences on the lives of women and girls. And remembering that should give us all a tremendous sense of urgency to say that our advocacy and our joint work has got to focus on understanding the vital role that connectivity and universal access to the web plays, and the multi-dimensional impacts and the domino effects, positive domino effects that connectivity can bring, such that our advocacy with government and the private sector is really around understanding that if we don't invest in this connectivity, we are leaving huge amounts of value on the table to the detriment, not just of women and girls, but to all of society. Thank you, and back to you.
Thank you very much, Anita, for all your points. Like you said, women may be more vulnerable in an environmental crisis, but they also make a big impact on the safety and ability of everyone to recover. So this has really been shown through our discussions that we have had here today with our panelists. Thank you. So finally, I would like to invite Ms. Janet, founder and CEO of Digital Opportunity Trust, for the closing remarks of this session. Janet, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And it's a delight to be here with everyone. Dot is also very delighted to have been part of the Equals Partnership from the very beginning. Dot and our network of young women and men across Africa and the Middle East. And just building on Anita's comments, we strongly feel the sense of urgency. And we've heard many strong messages today from our panelists around the action that needs to be taken. But I wanted to just a moment to connect the unique characteristics of women's humanity with digital inclusion and why we must bridge the gender digital divide. And my remarks have been inspired by many deep conversations with the young digital inclusion champions across the DOT network and friends from the Baha'i international community. And as we have heard, in the wake of climate-induced disaster, livelihoods directly dependent on stable and healthy ecosystems are often largely pursued by women. They are upended. Many lose access to land, shelter, as well as financial support or recourse. Vulnerabilities deepen where societies already fall short of realizing the full potentialities of women. And yet women are not simply victims. Their insights form the range of human experience and enable the construction of a fuller picture of reality. Often connected to large networks, women are an integral element of communal flourishing, community-based solutions, and mobilization. Young and old alike, the experiences of women offer profound insight into safeguarding humankind's home, the present generation, and those still to come. So ensuring that the potential of women is fully harnessed in our efforts to build resilient communities will require action on at least two fronts. Increasing women's presence in leadership roles, including young women, so that they can publicly lead and promote gender equitable and universally accessible solutions. And Arti, we heard this from you, and I as well will recognize Doreen's leadership in this space. And secondly, we need to create conditions for women to engage more meaningfully in community life, as we've heard from Selu and others. And bridging the gender digital divide can enable and amplify these actions at scale. DOT has vividly seen this happen by empowered young women across our networks in Africa and in the Middle East. And as King Abdullah said many years ago now, it is not just the Internet of Things. It is the Internet of humanity. We are connected by our humanity, and we cannot afford to have women and girls not connected for the sake of our planet and humankind. Co-designing solutions with young women will also amplify the feminine leadership qualities so critical in formulating environmentally conscious programs and strategies for building more inclusive communities, an inclination toward collaboration and inclusion, and a disposition toward care and selflessness, prioritizing longer-term interests and considering the well-being of future generations. Young people are incredibly resilient. They have hope, courage, and determination to overcome obstacles and catalyze community transformation. If we engage young women and in safe spaces, equip them with the digital literacy skills and empower them to be leaders and role models in their communities, then they will have the confidence, abilities, and knowledge to act and to leverage technology in community mobilization and building community resilience to disaster response. And DOT has dramatically seen this happen in conflict areas, in refugee camps, and states in crisis. When young women are supported and empowered, they do the same for others. For the past 20 years, DOT has seen this happen with a massive multiplier effect. Young women teaching their peers, their sisters, their mothers, passing on digital knowledge and empowering them. And so I'll close with the third action. Now is the moment. We must invest our trust in the talent of young people and womankind, break down financial barriers, address cultural differences through co-design, equip youth with the skills and the opportunities, and invest in women, young women, as the builders of the Internet of humanity and co-interpreters of a gender equitable future. Thank you, and thank you to all who have joined us for this very, very important event today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janet, for all your points and for stressing on the importance of co-designing solutions with women and girls given center space and on equal footing. Thank you very much. We have now reached the end of this crucial discussion that we've had today. We've had some great points discussed for us to learn from and also work on. So I would like to thank the UN Commission on the Status of Women for this side event and the brilliant work that they do. Thank you to all the partners and our expert panelists. We are John, Doreen, Aarti, Selu, and our speakers, Anita and Janet, for the guiding inputs. Most importantly, I would like to thank all of you for taking time out and for all your inputs and your great questions. Have a great evening and goodbye, everyone. Thank you.